The dust didn't settle in Shadow Creek anymore. It just moved from one place to another, restless as the people who stayed behind. Elias Crow stood on the warped boards of the sheriff's office porch, watching the sun bleed out over the Superstition ridgeline. His coat hung loose on a frame that had seen better meals, and his fingers, long, steady, rested near his belt, nowhere close to the revolver he kept oiled but rarely touched. He wasn't looking at the sunset. He was counting. 12 buildings still had glass in the windows. 19 families remained, down from 43 when he'd arrived 2 years back. The mine had coughed up its last worthwhile copper 8 months ago, and the company men had packed their ledgers and left without so much as a forwarded address. What stayed behind was the skeleton, false front shops with peeling paint, a saloon that opened when someone felt optimistic, and a church that hadn't seen a preacher since spring. Shadow Creek was dying the way old things died in Arizona, slow, mean, and without dignity. Sheriff? Elias didn't turn. He knew the voice. Samuel Cartwright, who ran the general store and had opinions about everything from grain prices to the territorial governor. Sam had a face like saddle leather and eyes that calculated profit margins even in his sleep. Sam, you see them yet? Not yet. They're coming. I know. Sam stepped up beside him, smelling of tobacco and anxiety. Word from the relay station says 8 riders, maybe 9. Voss is leading them. Elias let the name sit in the air between them. Clayton Voss. The kind of outlaw who'd graduated from rustling cattle to controlling whole territories. Smart enough to avoid the big cities where federal marshals operated, vicious enough that smaller towns learned to pay tribute or pay in blood. He'd carved out a circuit through the territorial gaps, places the law forgot about. Places like Shadow Creek. They hit Furnace Bend last month, Sam continued, took everything that wasn't nailed down, shot the deputy when he objected. Town paid them to leave. I heard. We don't have what Furnace Bend had, Elias. We can't pay. I know that too. Sam's jaw worked. Then what's the plan? Elias finally looked at him. His eyes were pale gray, the color of smoke, and they had a quality that made people uncomfortable. Not threatening exactly, just aware. Like he could see 3 moves ahead in a game you didn't know you were playing. The plan, Elias said quietly, is you go home, lock your doors, keep your family inside. That's it? That's your whole goddamn plan? That's the part that concerns you. Sam's face flushed. I got a right to know how you're planning to handle— No, Elias interrupted, his voice still soft but with something underneath it now, something that made Sam's words die in his throat. You don't. You have a right to be safe. That's what you elected me for. So go be safe, Sam. Let me do what you're paying me to do. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Sam spat into the dust and walked away, muttering something about damned fool sheriffs who thought books made good bullets. Elias turned back to the horizon. The truth was, he didn't have a plan. He had something better. He had preparation, and he had time. The Voss gang arrived just before nightfall, exactly when Elias knew they would. Outlaws liked the drama of sunset arrivals. The long shadows, the amber light, the way it made everything look like a stage play. Clayton Voss was no different. 9 riders, as predicted. They came in loose formation, spread wide enough to look intimidating, but not so scattered they couldn't support each other in a fight. Professional. Elias watched from inside the sheriff's office, standing back from the window where the lamplight wouldn't silhouette him. Voss rode a gray gelding that probably cost more than most people in Shadow Creek earned in a year. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with a black beard trimmed close, and eyes that cataloged everything they touched. He wore his guns low and tied down, 2 of them, matching Colts with ivory grips. The men flanking him were a mix: gunslingers, saddle tramps, a few who probably started as cowboys and discovered crime paid better. They stopped in the middle of the street right in front of the saloon, deliberate, central, a statement. Sheriff, Voss's voice carried easily in the still air. Come on out. Let's talk like civilized men. Elias counted to 10. Then he stepped out onto the porch, empty-handed, moving with the kind of careful slowness that suggested neither fear nor eagerness. Just a man doing a job. Evening, he said. Voss smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You're the law here? I am. Got a name? Elias Crow. Something flickered across Voss's face. Recognition, maybe, or just curiosity. That right? Elias Crow. You wouldn't be the same Crow who used to run with... No, Elias said flatly. Different man, common name. The lie sat between them, obvious as a poker tell, but Voss let it stand. He had other games to play. Well, Sheriff Crow, I'm Clayton Voss. These are my associates. We're just passing through, looking for a place to rest our horses, maybe take on some supplies. Figured a lawful town like this would extend some hospitality. Saloons open. Rooms upstairs. General store, too, though Sam keeps limited hours. You're welcome to what we've got, long as you pay fair and keep the peace. Voss's smile widened. Oh, we'll keep the peace, peaceful as Sunday morning. But see, that's the thing about peace. It costs something to maintain. Security. Protection. A lot of dangerous folks pass through these parts. Bandits, raiders, the kind of men who might take advantage of a small town with... He looked Elias up and down. Limited law enforcement resources. We manage. I'm sure you do. But management, real management, the kind that keeps people safe at night, that requires investment. Insurance, you might say. Now, a town this size, I'd estimate fair compensation at, say, $500. Monthly. The number hung in the air like a noose. We don't have $500, Elias said. Monthly or otherwise. Mine's tapped. Most folks here are holding on by their fingernails. You're welcome to look around, talk to people. You'll see I'm telling the truth. Voss studied him for a long moment. Then he dismounted, slow and easy, and walked toward the porch. His men stayed mounted but shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. You know what I think, Sheriff Crow? Voss stopped at the bottom of the steps, close enough that Elias could smell horse sweat and gun oil. I think you're probably right. This place looks about as prosperous as a graveyard, but that presents a problem for both of us. See, I can't ride into a town and leave empty-handed. Bad for my reputation. Makes other towns think they can say no too. So even if you don't have 500 in coin, you've got something. Goods, livestock. Maybe some of those pretty little things I saw peeking out windows when we rode in. Elias's expression didn't change. No. No? You'll get no protection money, no goods, no livestock, and you'll damn sure get nothing else. You want a bed and a meal? Pay for it. Want supplies, Sam will sell you what he can spare. But that's all you're getting from Shadow Creek. The street had gone very quiet. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Voss laughed, a genuine sound, full of real amusement. You got spine, I'll give you that. Stupid spine, but spine. Tell me something, Sheriff. You wearing that gun for decoration, or you actually know how to use it? I know how. You fast? Fast enough. Fast enough. Voss repeated the words like he was tasting them. See, I'm fast too, real fast. So are most of my boys. We've killed men faster than you, smarter than you, meaner than you. We've burned towns that said no. We've made examples that people tell stories about. So I'm going to ask you one more time, nice and polite. You sure you want to do this dance? Elias looked past Voss to the mounted men. He counted guns, assessed postures, noted which horses were fresh and which were tired. Then he looked back at Voss. I'm sure, he said, but I'm also sure you're tired. Your horses are tired. It's been a long ride and you probably want whiskey and a bed more than you want trouble tonight. So here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to stable your horses, get rooms, and sleep. Tomorrow morning, you'll eat breakfast, settle your bills, and ride out. Everybody walks away whole. Nobody has to prove anything. And if we don't, then we'll have a different conversation. Voss's hand drifted toward his gun. Not drawing, just touching, a reminder. You really think you can take all 9 of us? No, Elias said honestly. I'd get maybe 3, 4 if I was lucky. Rest would kill me. But you'd be first, Clayton. That's not arrogance, that's mathematics. I'm already aimed at you, and you're still reaching. So even if your boys gun me down, you won't be around to spend whatever you take from this town. The math was cold and clear. Voss was fast, probably faster than Elias. But Elias had position, preparation, and the willingness to die if it kept his town safe. That made him the more dangerous man in this specific moment. Voss knew it too. Elias could see the calculation behind his eyes. Interesting, Voss said finally. He stepped back,
hands spread in a peaceful gesture. You know what? You're right, we are tired. Been riding hard, so we'll take those rooms, get some sleep. But Sheriff? His smile returned, sharper now. We're going to have that different conversation, sooner than you think. He turned and mounted his horse in one smooth motion. The gang followed his lead, steering toward the stable and saloon. But as they moved past the sheriff's office, Elias caught the look that passed between several of them. Not fear, not respect. Planning. They were going to hit the town. The only question was when. Elias waited until full dark before he moved. The Voss gang had taken rooms above the saloon, posted one man as a watch, and settled in like they planned to stay. Which they did, just not as paying guests. He slipped out the back of the sheriff's office and moved through Shadow Creek's alleys like he'd been born to shadow. He had. Different life, different name, but the skills didn't forget even when the man tried to. First stop, the church. Father Morrison had died last winter, and the building sat empty now, but Rachel Morrison still kept the keys. She answered his knock immediately. She'd been waiting. "They here?" she whispered. "They're here." Rachel was 40, rail thin, with hands that knew hard work and eyes that had buried a husband and 2 children to consumption. She didn't scare easy. "What do you need? Ring the bell tomorrow, when you see me in the street with them. 3 pulls, then stop." "That's it?" "That's everything." She nodded. Elias had learned not to explain himself to Rachel. She trusted action more than words. Second stop, Samuel Cartwright's store. Sam answered the back door with a shotgun, which he lowered when he recognized Elias. "Thought you didn't have a plan," Sam said. "I don't. I have a setup. There's a difference." "Which is?" "A plan assumes they do what you expect. A setup works no matter what they do." Elias moved past him into the storeroom. "Your family in the cellar?" "Been there since sunset." "Good. Keep them there tomorrow. All day. Don't come out until you hear the all clear." "Which is?" "Me knocking on the cellar door." Sam watched as Elias moved through the store, checking window angles, testing floorboards. "You really think you can stop them?" Elias paused. "I think they're not leaving here with what they came for." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Third stop, the old assay office. Hadn't been used in months, but Tom Way kept tools there, mining equipment mostly, but Tom had other skills. He was waiting inside, lamplight casting his shadow long against the wall. Tom didn't waste time on greetings. Positions? Same as we discussed, overlapping fields, no blind spots. They're professional. They'll notice. They'll notice when it matters. Not before. Tom produced a carefully drawn map of Shadow Creek. Every building, every angle, every line of sight. They'd spent months preparing this, playing out scenarios, adjusting. Not for Voss specifically, but for the reality that Shadow Creek was vulnerable and eventually someone would notice. "The emplacements are ready," Tom said. "But Elias, these are killers. You give them half a chance. I won't." "You sure about that?" Tom's eyes were sharp. "I've heard stories about you, about who you used to be, man who can walk away from that kind of violence. I respect it, but sometimes walking away isn't an option." "I'm not walking away." "But you're not walking back either. You're trying to thread a needle that might not have a hole." Elias met his gaze. "You asking me to be something I'm not?" "I'm asking if you can do what needs doing when it needs doing." The question sat heavy between them. Elias had asked himself the same thing every day for 2 years. Every time he strapped on the badge, every time he settled a dispute without drawing his gun, every time he chose words over violence. He'd built a new life on the premise that his old one was dead and buried. But the dead had a way of rising when you needed them most. "I can do what needs doing," Elias said quietly. "Question is whether what needs doing is what everyone thinks it is." Tom studied him for another moment, then nodded. "All right, we're set. Just don't get yourself killed trying to prove a point." "No promises." Final stop, his own office. Elias sat at his desk and pulled out the leather-bound journal he kept locked in the bottom drawer. He'd started it the day he arrived in Shadow Creek. A record of everything. Every resident, every building, every resource. Supply lines, water sources, defensive positions. Weather patterns. travel times, escape routes. It wasn't a lawman's journal, it was a tactician's. He flipped to the back pages where he'd sketched scenarios. Bandits, raiders, corrupt company men. Each one mapped out, calculated, prepared for. The Voss situation fell somewhere between scenarios 6 and 9. Organized criminals with military precision but civilian vulnerabilities. The key wasn't stopping them. It was making them stop themselves. He pulled out a separate piece of paper and began writing. Instructions, clear and specific. If something happened to him, if this went wrong, the town needed to know what to do next. Where to go. Who to trust. How to survive. He sealed it in an envelope and addressed it to Rachel Morrison. Then he checked his revolver, cleaned it, loaded it, holstered it, and sat in the dark, waiting for dawn. Mate. The Voss gang made their move at mid-morning, which told Elias everything he needed to know about their tactics. Not a midnight raid, too risky, too many unknowns. Not dawn. People were alert after a night's rest. But mid-morning, when the town had settled into routine, when guards dropped and attention wandered. Professional. Elias was standing in front of the general store when they emerged from the saloon, 9 men spreading out with practiced efficiency. They weren't drawing weapons yet, but the threat was clear in their positioning. Voss walked point, relaxed and smiling. Morning, Sheriff. Morning. Beautiful day. Shame to waste it on unpleasantness. Doesn't have to be unpleasant. Voss stopped about 20 feet away. His men had fanned out, covering angles, blocking escape routes. Standard intimidation formation. You're right. Doesn't have to be. But you made it unpleasant last night, turning down a fair business proposition. Made me look bad in front of my associates. Made them wonder if maybe I'm getting soft. Can't have that. So this is about your reputation. Everything's about reputation, Sheriff. You know that. Man's word is his currency out here. I said I'd come back for that different conversation, and here I am. So let's talk plainly. This town is going to pay, one way or another. Question is whether we do this civil or messy. Elias glanced past Voss to the men flanking him. He recognized the types. 2 were pure killers, the kind who'd shoot you for looking at them wrong. 3 were opportunists, dangerous but not suicidal. The rest were somewhere in between, loyal to Voss but not to death. How much? Elias asked. Voss's eyebrows rose. I'm sorry? You said the town pays. How much? Well now, that's more like it. Reason over stubbornness. Voss pretended to consider. Given the disrespect last night, I'd say 1,000. Plus supplies. Plus, no. The word cut through Voss's performance like a knife. No? I asked how much because I wanted you to say it out loud. Wanted the town to hear it. Wanted your men to hear it. $1,000 from a town that doesn't have 50. You're not here for protection money, Clayton. You're here to strip us clean and burn what's left. So let's skip the theater. Voss's smile vanished. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. There's 9 of us. 1 of you. I can count. You really gonna die for these people, for this dead-end town? Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm not planning on dying, but yeah, if that's what it takes. Why? Voss sounded genuinely curious. What are they to you? You're not from here. You don't have family here. Hell, half these people probably don't even like you. So why throw your life away? It was a good question. Elias had asked himself the same thing. The answer wasn't simple or noble. It was darker than that. Because, he said slowly, if I let you do this, if I step aside and let you take what you want, then I'm the same man I used to be, just standing in a different spot. The man you used to be? The one who looked the other way. The one who told himself someone else's problem wasn't his concern. The one who drew his gun for money instead of principle. Elias's voice hardened. I've been that man. I know what he costs, and I'm not paying that price anymore. Voss stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, sharp and bitter. You're a goddamn fool, Crow. But I'll give you this. You got conviction. He stepped back. Boys, I think the sheriff needs a lesson in mathematics. Show him what 9 beats 1 looks like. The gang moved as one, hands dropping to guns, and the church bell rang. 3 pulls, loud and clear in the morning air. Every member of the Voss gang froze. It wasn't the sound itself, it was what it represented. Bells meant alarm. Alarm meant witnesses. Witnesses meant complications. "What the hell?" one of them muttered. "It's nothing," Voss snapped. "Just some—" The general store's front door opened. Samuel Cartwright stepped out, carrying his shotgun low but visible. He didn't point it at anyone, didn't say anything, just stood there. Then the assay office door opened. Tom Way, also armed. Then the boarding house, the feed store, the saloon's side entrance. One by one, the people of Shadow Creek emerged. Not all of them. The vulnerable, the young, the sick stayed hidden. But enough. 15, maybe 20 townspeople, all armed, all positioned with clear lines of sight. It wasn't an army, it was barely a militia, but it was enough to change the math. Voss's face went very still. "You set us up." "No," Elias said. "I gave you a choice. You chose this. You think these shopkeepers scare me? We're professionals. We'll cut through them like—" "Maybe," Elias interrupted. "Probably, even. You'll win. Your boys are faster, better trained. You'll kill most of us, but you'll take casualties. Maybe 2, maybe 3 of your men. And for what? A town with nothing worth taking. Is that a win, Clayton? Is that what you tell the next town when you ride in with 6 men instead of 9? The math was brutal and clear. In a straight fight, the Voss gang would win. But winning and profiting were different things. Dead outlaws didn't spend money. Wounded ones couldn't ride. And a gang that took heavy losses over a worthless prize looked weak. Voss knew it. Elias could see the calculation behind his eyes, the same cold logic that had kept him alive this long. "You smug son of a bitch," Voss said quietly. "You think you're clever. Think you've backed me into a corner. I think you're smart enough to recognize bad business when you see it. There are other ways to make an example. There are, but they all cost you more than you're willing to pay. That's why you're still talking instead of shooting." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. The town held its collective breath. Fingers rested on triggers. The sun beat down. Somewhere, a horse stamped nervously. Then Voss smiled. It was a terrible smile, full of promises. "You're right," he said. "This is bad business, not worth the bullets." He looked at his men. "Mount up. We're leaving." They didn't move immediately. Several looked confused, others disappointed. But Voss's authority held. "I said mount up." Slowly, reluctantly, the gang began moving toward their horses. But Voss wasn't done. He turned back to Elias, voice low enough that only the sheriff could hear. "You think you won. You didn't. You bought time, that's all. Maybe a month, maybe 6. But I'll be back, Crow. Or someone like me will. Because you showed them something today. Showed them they could say no. And that's worse than robbing them. That's dangerous. So yeah, we'll ride out, but we'll remember. And we'll make sure every other gang from here to the California line knows about the sheriff who got uppity. They'll come, one after another, until eventually you lose. Could be tomorrow. Could be a year from now. But you'll lose." Elias held his gaze. "Maybe. But not today." Voss's smile widened. "Not today," he agreed. Then he mounted his horse and led his gang out of Shadow Creek at a walk. Slow, deliberate, a final show of control. The town watched them go. Nobody cheered. Nobody spoke. They just waited until the dust settled and the riders disappeared over the ridge. Then, finally, Samuel Cartwright let out a long breath. "Jesus Christ, Elias." "Get everyone inside," Elias said quietly. "Meeting in an hour, church." "You think they'll come back?" "No, not them. But Voss was right. Others will." "So what do we do?" Elias looked at the empty street, the tired buildings, the people who'd trusted him to keep them safe. "We prepare," he said, "and we hope that the next time they're as smart as Voss." The meeting ran long. Everyone had questions, fears, opinions. Elias let them talk themselves out, then laid it simple. Shadow Creek had a choice. They could scatter, abandon the town, try to start over somewhere else. Or they could stay and prepare for the next threat. Because there would be a next threat. "We can't win every time," Tom Way said. "Eventually the numbers won't be in our favor." "You're right," Elias agreed. "So we don't win by fighting. We win by being too expensive to rob. We build defenses, train, create networks, make it so that hitting Shadow Creek costs more than it's worth. That's a hell of a long-term plan, Sam pointed out. What happens if they come tomorrow? Then we do what we did today. Make it not worth their while. Rachel Morrison stood up. And what happens when you're not here? When someone faster or meaner puts you down? This whole plan depends on you, Sheriff. That's a weak foundation. She wasn't wrong. The town had rallied today because they trusted Elias to know what he was doing, but that trust was built on sand. They didn't know who he used to be, what he'd done, the bodies he'd left behind when he walked away from that life. If they knew, they might not trust him at all. Then you train, Elias said. Learn to defend yourselves without me. Build something that lasts beyond one man with a badge. Easy to say, harder to do. Everything worth doing is hard. The meeting broke up eventually, people drifting away with more questions than answers. Elias stood alone in the church as the sun set, thinking about Voss's parting words. You'll lose eventually. Probably true. The odds caught up with everyone. But maybe, he could build something here that outlasted him. A town that didn't need a gunfighter to survive. A place where people protected each other because it was right, not because they were scared. It was a long shot. But long shots were all he had left. He walked back to his office as stars appeared overhead. The street was quiet now, peaceful. Easy to forget the morning's tension. Easy to pretend they were safe. But Elias had learned not to pretend. Safety was an illusion. The best you could do was prepare for when it shattered. He sat at his desk and added today's events to his journal. Every detail, every decision, every mistake. Future sheriffs, if there were any, could learn from it, or at least know what they were getting into. Then he locked the journal away, checked his gun one more time, and settled in for a long night. Outside, Shadow Creek slept. Fragile, vulnerable, but still standing. For now, that was enough. 3 days passed before the second wave hit, and it came from a direction Elias hadn't anticipated. The rider arrived alone at dawn, his horse lathered and blowing hard. Elias was already awake. He'd learned to sleep light years ago, and some habits refused to die. He watched from his window as the man dismounted in front of the saloon, stumbled, caught himself against a post. Not an attack. A warning. Elias was outside before the man hit the ground. Up close, he could see the blood. Dark stains spreading across the rider's shirt, one arm hanging useless. The man's eyes rolled up, trying to focus. "Sheriff!" he gasped. You're the sheriff?" "I am. Easy now. Where you hit?" "Shoulder, maybe ribs. The man coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "They're coming. Voss sent them. Different crew, 20, maybe more." Elias felt his stomach drop. "When?" "Day behind me. Maybe less. They're not like the others. These are killers, real ones. Voss put bounty on this town, said anyone who burns it gets 500. "Why are you telling me this?" The man's laugh turned into another cough. "Because I'm not that kind of killer. I ride with bad men, but I don't murder towns. Shot my way out when I figured what they were planning. Figured I owed somebody a warning." Tom Way appeared at Elias's shoulder, medical bag already in hand. He'd been a field medic during the Apache Wars, and his hands moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away the shirt, assessing damage. "He needs a doctor," Tom said. "Closest one's in Tucson, 3 days' ride." "Then he needs luck." Tom looked up at Elias. "Get him inside. I'll do what I can." They carried the man into the sheriff's office, laid him on the cot Elias kept for prisoners. The blood looked worse in lamplight. Tom worked in silence, cleaning, probing, his face growing grimmer. "Talk to me," Elias said quietly. "Bullet's still in there, lodged near the bone. I can get it out, but he's lost a lot of blood. Even if infection doesn't set in, just do what you can." Tom nodded and bent back to his work. Elias stepped outside where Sam Cartwright and Rachel Morrison had gathered, along with a handful of others drawn by the commotion. 20 men, Sam said. It wasn't a question. "That's what he says." "We can't fight 20. We barely held off 9 with a bluff." "I know." Rachel's voice was steady. "Then we evacuate. Load up what we can carry and scatter. They can't chase everyone." "They can burn everything," Elias pointed out. "And they will. That's the point. Voss wants to make an example. Show the frontier what happens when you say no to him." "So what do we do?" This from John Hastings, who ran the livery and had hands like sledgehammers. Roll over? Let them do what they want? Elias looked at the eastern horizon where the sun was just starting to paint the sky. A day. Maybe less. Not enough time to run. Not enough time to prepare properly. Just enough time to make hard choices. We fight, he said, but not the way they expect. Meaning we turn Shadow Creek into a trap. Make them work for every inch. Make it cost them. Sam shook his head. That's suicide, even if we kill half of them. We're not trying to kill them, Elias interrupted. We're trying to break them. There's a difference. Professional killers work for money. You make the job expensive enough, painful enough, they'll quit, find easier prey. That's a hell of a gamble. You got a better one? Nobody answered. After a moment, Rachel said, What do you need? That's when Elias knew they were committed. Not because they thought he could win, but because standing and fighting felt better than running, even if it killed them. He laid it out quick and brutal. The town would be divided into zones, fallback positions, each more defensible than the last. The outer buildings would be abandoned, rigged with surprises. The inner core, the church, the general store, the sheriff's office, would be fortified. Everyone who could shoot would be armed and positioned. Everyone who couldn't would be hidden in the mine tunnels that honeycombed the hills behind town. You're turning us into soldiers, Tom observed when he emerged from the office, wiping blood off his hands. I'm giving you a chance, Elias corrected. The man inside. He make it? For now. He's stable, weak, but stable. Good. I need him conscious. Need to know everything he knows about this crew. Give him an hour. Elias used that hour to walk the town with Tom, John, and Rachel, pointing out positions, explaining angles of fire, marking fallback routes. They'd been over this before, the theoretical defense of Shadow Creek, but theory and practice were different beasts. The boarding house, Tom said, pointing. 3 stories, good sight lines. We can put shooters on the roof. No, too exposed. First place they'll light up. We use it as a decoy. Make it look defended, draw their fire, waste their ammunition. That's cold. That's tactics. We don't have the numbers to waste on heroic stands. Every position has a purpose. Every shooter has a job. Nobody plays hero. Rachel was quiet until they reached the church. Then she said, You've done this before. It wasn't a question, but Elias answered anyway. Different war, different reasons, same principles. Which war? He met her eyes. She wasn't asking about the army or official conflicts. She was asking about the other kind, the dirty, personal kind that didn't make history books. The kind that doesn't have a name, he said finally. The kind you don't walk away from without scars. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. All right, but Elias, after this, if we survive this, you're going to tell us who you really are. No more deflections. No more different man stories. We're entitled to know who we're following into hell. Fair enough. They finished the circuit and returned to the office where the wounded rider, his name was Marcus Webb, was sitting up, pale but conscious. Tom had him dosed with something for the pain, and his eyes had that distant, glassy quality, but his voice was clear enough. 23, he said when Elias asked for details. 23 men, give or take. Leader's name is Casper. Dutch Casper. He was a cavalry sergeant before he deserted. Knows tactics, knows killing. Half his crew are ex-military. Rest are just mean. Weapons? Rifles, mostly. A few scatterguns. Casper's got a Sharps rifle. Picks men off at 300 yards. They'll hit you from distance first, soften you up, then move in. How do they approach? Marcus closed his eyes, remembering. Standard formation. Scouts first, then main force split 3 ways. Pin you down, flank you, squeeze. They're not subtle. Don't need to be. Elias absorbed this, fitting it against the terrain he knew. What changed your mind? Why warn us? Told you, I'm not that kind. Bullshit. Elias's voice was flat. You ride with Casper. You've done worse than burn a town. So why really? Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, My sister. Had a sister anyway. Town she lived in got hit by raiders 6 years back. She was 19. He swallowed hard. When Casper started talking about what they'd do here, how they'd make it memorable, all I could see was her. Figured maybe if I warned you, got you to run, maybe that'd balance something. Stupid, probably, but it's all I got. The silence stretched. Finally, Elias said, She have a name? Your sister? Caroline. Caroline Webb. All right, Marcus Webb. You just bought yourself some redemption, but you're going to work for it. I need everything you know about Casper's tactics, every trick, every preference, every weakness. You give me that, and maybe when this is over, you walk away clean. And if I can't? If the pain gets too bad or the fever sets in? Then you'll die knowing you tried. That's more than most men get. Marcus managed a weak smile. You're a hard son of a bitch, Sheriff. So I've been told. They spent the next 2 hours extracting information. Casper liked to attack at midday when the sun was high and defenders were tired. He always positioned himself on high ground with that Sharps rifle, controlling the battlefield from distance. His men were disciplined but not creative. They followed orders well, but didn't improvise. And they had a pattern: destroy outer defenses first, then close in systematically, burning as they went. Fire's their favorite weapon, Marcus said. Not just for destruction, for terror. People see flames, they panic, make mistakes. So we don't panic, Elias said. We plan for it. By noon, Shadow Creek had transformed. The outer buildings had been stripped of anything valuable and rigged with surprises. False floors, tripwires, hidden obstacles. The inner core was fortified with whatever they could scavenge. Overturned wagons, stacked crates, barricaded windows. Shooters were positioned in overlapping fields of fire, with clear fallback routes marked. The townspeople worked with grim efficiency. Fear, Elias had learned, could paralyze or motivate. The key was giving people something to do with it. Rachel found him in the church steeple, where he was studying approaches through field glasses. Families are in the tunnels, she reported. 17 women and children, plus the elderly. They've got water, food for 3 days. Tom's staying with them in case anyone needs medical attention. Tom should be up here. We need his rifle. Tom says his rifle won't matter if you're all dead and those tunnels are found. He stays with the vulnerable. That's his choice. Elias lowered the glasses. How many shooters? 18, counting you. Most are decent shots. A few are exceptional. John Hastings can hit a bottle at 100 yards. Sam's better with a shotgun than a rifle, but he's steady. The Chen brothers, they hunted elk in Colorado before the mine went bust. They don't miss much. Against 23 professional killers. Against 23 men who think this'll be easy. Rachel's jaw set. We've got surprise, preparation, and motivation. That counts for something. It counts, just not enough. Then what else do we have? Elias looked at her. This woman who'd buried half her family and refused to break, who'd organized the town's defense without being asked, who faced down death with the same expression she used for Sunday laundry. We have desperation, he said, and sometimes that's the most dangerous thing in the world. She almost smiled. Is that what you're counting on? Desperation? Among other things. Care to share what the other things are? Not yet. Don't want to jinx it. Jinx it. Rachel shook her head. You know what I think, Elias Crow? I think you're exactly the kind of man who makes his own luck. The question is whether you've got enough of it to cover all of us. She left before he could answer, which was just as well, because Elias didn't have an answer. Luck was a lie people told themselves to explain survival. The truth was simpler and harder. You prepared, you adapted, and you accepted that sometimes preparation and adaptation weren't enough. The sun climbed toward its zenith. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, and on the eastern horizon, a dust plume appeared. They were coming. Elias rang the church bell, one long pull, the signal they'd agreed on. Below, shooters moved to positions. Windows shuttered. The street emptied. In less than 2 minutes, Shadow Creek looked abandoned. But from the steeple, Elias could see them all. Sam behind the general store's reinforced counter. The Chen brothers on the rooftop of the feed store. John Hastings in the livery loft. Rachel in the church itself, rifle propped and ready. 18 people who'd chosen to fight rather than run. He climbed down from the steeple and took his own position behind a buttress that gave him a clear view of the main street. His rifle was loaded, his revolver checked. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. And underneath it all, something old and dark stirred. The part of him he'd buried, the skills he'd sworn never to use again. They rose now like muscle memory, cold and precise. He'd been telling himself for 2 years that he was a different man, that the killer he'd been was dead and gone. But watching those riders approach, feeling the familiar weight of preparation settling over him, He knew the truth. You didn't kill that part of yourself. You just taught it when to sleep and when to wake. And right now, Shadow Creek needed it awake. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. Smart, careful. They spread out in a loose line, studying the town, looking for movement, for weaknesses, for the trap they suspected was there. Elias counted them through his rifle scope. 24, not 23. Marcus had miscounted, or Casper had picked up another gun along the way. The leader was obvious. Tall man on a black horse, holding that Sharps rifle like he was born with it. Dutch Casper. Even at this distance, Elias could read his body language. Confident, methodical, patient, professional. Casper raised one hand and made a gesture. 3 riders broke off, circling wide. Scouts, checking flanks. Standard procedure. Elias let them go. They'd find what he wanted them to find. Abandoned buildings, empty streets, no obvious ambush. They'd report back that the town looked deserted, which was when Casper would make his first mistake. 10 minutes later, the scouts returned. Brief conversation, then Casper made another gesture. The main force split into 3 groups, just like Marcus said they would. They approached at a walk, weapons ready but not aimed, still careful but starting to relax. The first group reached the boarding house. They dismounted, checked the door, found it unlocked. 2 went inside while the others waited. Elias counted to 5. The tripwire caught them on the stairs. Not explosives, just a carefully rigged collapse that sent 2 men crashing through weakened floorboards into the cellar. Their shouts brought the others running, and in the confusion, Rachel's rifle cracked from the church. One of Casper's men spun and fell. Not dead. Elias could see him moving, but out of the fight. That's when everything accelerated. Casper's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. His men scattered to cover, returning fire at the church. But Rachel was already gone, moving to her second position. Bullets shattered stained glass where she'd been standing seconds before. The second group hit the feed store and ran into the Chen brothers' crossfire. 2 more men down, one screaming about his leg. The return fire was impressive, professional discipline, covering angles, suppressing positions. But they were shooting at shadows. Casper had them pull back, regroup. Elias could almost hear the calculation happening in his head. This wasn't the easy burn job he'd been promised. The town was prepared, organized, deadly. Question was, would that make him quit or just make him angry? Angry, apparently. Casper set up his Sharps on a small rise about 200 yards out and started methodically shooting at anything that moved. The rifle's boom echoed off the hills, and his aim was terrifyingly good. One of the Chen brothers took a round through the shoulder and had to fall back. Sam's position took 3 hits that splintered wood and sent him scrambling. That's when Elias made his own move. He'd positioned himself with a clear line to Casper's rise. It was a long shot, nearly 250 yards uphill, with wind, but he'd made harder shots when he was younger. The question was whether his hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget. He settled the rifle, controlled his breathing, felt for the wind. Casper was focused on the church, tracking Rachel's movements. Confident, exposed. Elias squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide by inches, close enough to kick dirt into Casper's face, but not close enough to wound. Still, it had the desired effect. Casper scrambled for better cover, and his systematic suppression broke off. But now they knew where Elias was. 6 rifles opened up on his position, rounds punching through the buttress, forcing him to move. He grabbed his gear and ran, heading for his second position in the livery. Behind him, he heard glass breaking, smelled smoke. They were burning the church. Rachel's voice cut through the gunfire. "I'm clear! Moving to position 3!" Good. She was following the plan. Don't fight for buildings, fight for time. Make them work for every inch. Elias reached the livery and found John Hastings already there, reloading with shaking hands. "They're burning everything," John said. His face was pale. "The church, the feed store, they're just torching it all." "That's the idea. Let them burn the empty buildings. Wastes their time and resources." "But the town is the people, John, not the buildings. Buildings we can replace." Another volley of shots hammered the livery's walls. One round came through a gap and ricocheted off a support beam inches from John's head. He flinched, nearly dropped his rifle. "Stay with me," Elias said sharply. "You know your job. 2 shots, then move. Don't try to be a hero." "I'm not trying to be anything. I'm just trying not to die." "Then don't." Take your shots and fall back when I say. They worked in rhythm for the next few minutes. Shoot, move, cover each other. They weren't trying to kill anyone, just keep Casper's men pinned down, make them cautious. And it was working. The attackers had taken cover, stopped their advance. They were shooting back hard, but they weren't pushing forward. Then Casper tried something different. A group of 5 men made a run at the general store, using fire cover from the others. They moved fast and smart, bounding from cover to cover. Sam opened up with his shotgun, caught one of them, but the others made it to the building. "Sam!" Elias shouted. "Fall back! Don't let them pin you!" But either Sam didn't hear or didn't want to hear. He stayed at his position, firing through the reinforced counter as Casper's men kicked in the door. What happened next was pure chaos. Shotgun blasts, return fire, shouting. Then an explosion, not large, but loud enough to shake the whole street. The general store's front wall blew outward in a shower of splinters and smoke. For a moment, everything stopped. Then Sam staggered out of the smoke, bleeding from a dozen cuts, his left arm hanging wrong. 3 of Casper's men followed, coughing but mobile. Elias shot one of them in the leg. The Chen brothers, the one who wasn't wounded, got another. But the third grabbed Sam and dragged him back as a shield. "Hold fire!" Casper's voice. "I said hold fire!" The shooting tapered off. Smoke drifted across the street. The church was fully engulfed now, flames reaching for the sky. The feed store was burning too. Half of Shadow Creek was turning into an inferno. Casper emerged from cover, still holding that Sharps rifle. He looked at the carnage, his wounded men, the burning buildings, the entrenched defenders, and his expression was pure calculation. "Sheriff Crow," his voice carried easily. "I know you're out there. Let's talk." Elias didn't answer, didn't move. Giving away his position now would be suicide. "Come on, Sheriff. You've made your point. You're organized. You're tough. You've cost me men. But look around. Half your town's burning. I've got one of your people. This can end one of 2 ways, hard or harder. Your choice." Still Elias stayed silent. He was counting Casper's remaining men, assessing positions, looking for angles. They had him outnumbered still, maybe 15 guns to his 14. But they'd lost their momentum, lost their confidence that this would be easy. "All right," Casper said, "hard way it is. But I want you to know, Sheriff, whatever happens next, it's on you. Every death, every burned building, every widow crying over her husband's body. That's your doing. You could have run, could have let us do our business and ride out, but you chose this." He gestured to the man holding Sam. "String him up, Main Street. Make sure everyone can see." "Wait!" Rachel's voice coming from somewhere near the church. "Wait, we'll talk. Just don't hurt him." "Rachel, no!" Elias shouted, breaking his silence. Too late. She emerged from the smoke, hands up, rifle left behind, walking into the open like she was going to a Sunday service instead of her execution. Casper smiled. "Now that's more like it. Come on over here, ma'am. Let's have a civilized conversation." Rachel stopped about 20 feet from Casper's position. She was covered in soot, her dress torn, but her back was straight and her voice was steady. "Let Sam go. Take me instead." "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm the one organizing this defense. You want the town to surrender, you need me to order it. Sam's just a shopkeeper. I'm the one they'll listen to." It was a lie. Elias was running the defense. Everyone knew that. But it was a good lie, believable. And it gave Casper something he wanted, a way to end this without losing more men. Casper considered. Then he nodded. "All right, here's the deal. You order your people to stand down, come out unarmed, and I'll take what I came for and ride out. Everyone lives. Town burns, but people survive. That's more mercy than you deserve. And if I refuse? Then I shoot this shopkeeper, then I hunt down every person hiding in this town, and when I find them, I make examples, children included. Your choice, ma'am." Elias could see it happening, see Rachel calculating the same brutal math he'd been running since this started. They couldn't win a straight fight, couldn't save the town. The best they could do was save lives. But surrender meant Casper would take everything, would leave them destitute, broken, scattered. Unless Elias moved before the thought fully formed. He'd spotted it minutes ago, but hadn't wanted to use it. Too risky. Too many ways it could go wrong. But Rachel was standing in the open, Sam was bleeding out, and Casper thought he'd won. Time to change the game. He grabbed the torch John had prepared for emergencies and threw it at the livery's back wall,
where they'd stacked hay soaked in kerosene. It caught immediately, flames roaring up.
Then he ran, not toward Casper, but toward the old powder magazine behind the assay office. The townspeople thought it was empty. Mine Company had cleaned it out when they left, but Elias had found 3 crates they'd missed, tucked in a corner. Not much powder, but enough. Enough to make Casper reconsider his position. He reached the magazine with bullets chasing him, yanked open the door, grabbed one of the small kegs. It was old, unstable, might not even work, but the threat was what mattered. He emerged holding it over his head. "Casper!" His voice cut through everything. "Look what I found!" The shooting stopped. Every eye went to the keg Elias was holding. "That's blasting powder," Casper said slowly. "You drop that, you die too." "I know." Elias's voice was calm, dead calm. "Question is, are you willing to bet I won't?" "You're bluffing." "Maybe. But this keg? It's old, unstable. Might go off if I just set it down hard. Might not. Want to find out?" The standoff stretched. Elias could see Casper's mind working, running probabilities. A suicidal sheriff with blasting powder changed everything. Even if Elias was bluffing, the risk was too high. "Here's my counteroffer," Elias said. "You leave. Now. Take your wounded and ride out. You don't get paid, but you don't get buried either. That's the deal. And if I say no, then I drop this keg and we all find out together what happens when old blasting powder gets upset." Elias smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "I've made my peace with dying today, Casper. Question is whether you have." The silence was absolute. Even the fires seemed to quiet, waiting. Then Casper lowered his rifle. "You're insane," he said. "I'm motivated. There's a difference. This isn't over." "Yeah, it is. For you, anyway. Ride out, Casper. Tell Voss. Tell whoever sent you. Shadow Creek costs more than it's worth. Find easier prey." For a long moment, Elias thought Casper might call the bluff. Might decide that killing one crazy sheriff was worth the risk. But professional killers don't get old by taking stupid chances. And Casper was professional down to his bones. "Mount up," he said to his men. "We're done here." "But the bounty isn't worth dying for. I said mount up." They moved slowly, reluctantly, collected their wounded, left their dead, 3 bodies that wouldn't be riding anywhere. Casper kept his eyes on Elias the whole time, and the promise in them was clear. "We'll meet again." Elias stood there holding that keg until the last rider disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he carefully, very carefully, set it down. His hands were shaking, not from fear, that would come later, but from adrenaline burn. He'd been holding his breath without realizing it. Rachel appeared at his elbow. "Was that keg really unstable?" "No idea. Never checked." "Jesus, Elias. You walked into the open. Called that a stupid move or a brave one?" "Both," she admitted. "Sam?" "Alive. Hurt, but alive. John's getting him to the tunnels where Tom can work on him." They stood together in the middle of the street, surrounded by burning buildings and the wreckage of their town. The church was gone. The feed store was gone. The general store was a crater. Half of Shadow Creek had turned to ash and smoke, but the people were alive. "We can't keep doing this," Rachel said quietly. Next time they'll know we're serious, know we'll fight. That counts for something." "Does it? Or does it just make us targets?" Elias didn't have an answer for that, so he just started walking, checking positions, making sure everyone was accounted for. 17 shooters still standing, 1 wounded but stable. 3 buildings total losses, 4 more damaged. Could have been worse. Could have been so much worse. But Rachel was right. They couldn't keep doing this. Eventually their luck would run out, or their bluffs would be called, or someone faster and meaner would ride in with numbers they couldn't match. Shadow Creek had bought itself time, but time wasn't the same as safety. As the sun set over the burning town, Elias stood alone in what used to be the church and made a decision. If they were going to survive, really survive, they needed more than tactics and preparation. They needed him to stop pretending he wasn't what he used to be. They needed the man he'd buried, and that thought scared him more than any gang of killers ever could. The fires burned through the night, and Elias let them. There was nothing left in those buildings worth saving, and the flames kept people busy, gave them something to do with their fear that wasn't panic. By dawn, the worst of it had died to embers, leaving Shadow Creek looking like a battlefield, which he supposed it was. Sam Cartwright had lost 3 fingers on his left hand and taken a piece of shrapnel in his gut. Tom Way worked on him for 6 hours in the mine tunnels by lamplight, sweat pouring down his face, while Sam bit down on a leather strap and tried not to scream. When it was over, Tom came out looking like he'd aged 10 years. "He'll live," Tom said, "but he won't be the same. The hand's crippled, and that gut wound, even if infection doesn't set in, he's going to have pain for the rest of his life." He knew the risks. Knowing and living with it are different things. Tom wiped his hands on a rag already stiff with dried blood. We all knew the risks. Doesn't make it easier when the bill comes due. Elias didn't argue. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago in places he tried not to think about. The cost always came due. You could delay it, negotiate it, but you couldn't escape it. Marcus Webb died 2 hours before dawn. The infection Tom had warned about set in fast and mean, and there wasn't enough medicine or skill in the world to stop it. He went quietly, which was more than he deserved and less than he'd hoped for. They buried him on the hill overlooking town, next to the graves of people who'd actually belonged to Shadow Creek. It didn't seem right, but Rachel insisted. "He tried to save us," she said. "That counts for something. He rode with the men who wanted to kill us. And then he didn't. People can change, Elias. Or have you forgotten?" The words hit harder than she probably meant them to. Elias had spent 2 years trying to prove people could change, that the man you were didn't have to be the man you'd always be. But standing in the wreckage of Shadow Creek, watching Marcus Webb get lowered into hard ground, he wondered if he'd been lying to himself. The town gathered that morning in what was left of the main street. 19 families, give or take. Some were already packing to leave, couldn't blame them for that. Others looked shell-shocked, waiting for someone to tell them what happened next. Elias didn't have good news. "We hurt them," he started. "Killed 3, wounded maybe 6 more. That'll slow down the next crew that comes looking, make them think twice. And if they don't think twice..." This from Catherine Mills, who ran the boarding house that wasn't there anymore. "What then? We fought off 2 gangs and lost half the town doing it. How many more times can we do this?" "As many as it takes." "That's not an answer. That's just stubbornness." "Maybe, but stubbornness is all we've got right now." John Hastings stepped forward, his face harder than Elias had ever seen it. "No. What we've got is a choice. Same choice we had before Voss showed up, before any of this started. We can stay and keep fighting, keep bleeding, keep hoping the next gang is the last gang. Or we can leave, scatter, find new towns that aren't marked for death." "They'll just mark those towns too," Elias said. "That's how this works. Predators don't stop hunting because prey moves. They follow." "So what are you saying? We fight forever? Turn Shadow Creek into some kind of fortress and live like we're under siege?" "I'm saying we make ourselves too expensive to hunt. Build something strong enough that the predators move on to easier prey." "And how long does that take? How many more buildings burn? How many more people get hurt?" John's voice cracked. "My daughter asked me this morning why the church was gone. Asked me if she'd ever get to go back to Sunday school. What am I supposed to tell her, Elias? That we're building something strong? That it'll all be worth it someday?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Elias looked at the faces around him, scared, angry, desperate for answers he didn't have. Tom Way watched him with those careful eyes. Rachel stood with her arms crossed, waiting. Even the Chen brothers, who rarely spoke in public, were listening. "Tell her the truth," Elias said finally. "Tell her the church burned because bad men came and we fought them off. Tell her we lost the building but not each other. Tell her Sunday school will happen somewhere else until we can rebuild. And tell her that her father stood his ground when it mattered." Pretty words, but words don't stop bullets. No. Preparation stops bullets, training stops bullets. People willing to defend what's theirs, that stops bullets. Elias met John's eyes. "You want to leave? Go. I won't stop you. Anyone wants to leave. You've got my blessing. But understand this. Running doesn't make you safe. Just makes you alone when the next threat finds you. And staying makes us what? Dead? Maybe. Or maybe it makes us something those bastards don't expect. Something they can't break." Catherine Mills spoke up. "What happened to you, Sheriff? Before you came here, I mean. You fight in a war?" "Several." "Which side?" "Whichever one paid. Then whichever one seemed less wrong. Then neither, when I figured out they were both lying. So you're a mercenary. Was, past tense. And now you're asking us to become what you were. Fighters, killers. Elias shook his head. I'm asking you to become defenders. There's a difference. Mercenaries fight for money. Killers fight for pleasure. Defenders fight because the alternative is worse. Sounds like splitting hairs to me. Then split hairs somewhere else. I'm not keeping anyone here against their will. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. Some people drifted away, heading back to their homes, or what was left of them. Others stayed, waiting for something more. Waiting for hope, probably. Elias didn't have much of that to offer. Rachel waited until most people had dispersed before approaching him. That could have gone better. Could have gone worse, too. You think they'll stay? The ones who are wavering? Some will, some won't. Human nature. We need more than some, Elias. We need everyone committed, or this falls apart. Then we need to give them something to commit to. Right now, all they see is ash and blood. So what do we give them? Elias looked at the ruins of Shadow Creek, thinking. The problem wasn't just surviving the next attack. The problem was the one after that, and the one after that. As long as Shadow Creek looked like easy prey, the wolves would keep coming. They needed to change the equation, make the town look like something else. We make this place a fortress, he said. Real defenses. Not just improvise barricades and hope. We dig in properly. Build walls, establish kill zones, create actual defensive positions. Turn Shadow Creek into the kind of place that gangs ride past instead of through. That takes money we don't have, resources we don't have. Then we get creative. Creative how? The mine tunnels. They honeycomb these hills, right? Miles of them. We map them, reinforce key sections, create escape routes and ambush positions. Anyone comes at us, we don't just defend the surface. We use the ground itself. Rachel considered this. That's actually not terrible, but it still doesn't solve the resource problem. We need materials, tools, people who know what they're doing. There's a mining camp 40 miles north. They shut down last month. Company went bankrupt. Equipment's probably still there. We send a team, salvage what we can. That's bandit country, Voss territory. Voss already wants us dead. Might as well give him more reasons to regret it. Rachel almost smiled. You know what scares me most about you, Elias? It's not that you're willing to take risks. It's that you make the risks sound reasonable. They are reasonable. We just don't have reasonable options anymore. She studied him for a long moment. All right, but I'm holding you to your promise. When this is over, if we survive this, you tell us the truth. All of it. Who you were, what you did, why you're really here. Deal. She walked away and Elias was left alone with his thoughts and the smell of burned wood. He'd made a lot of promises in his life, broken most of them. But this one, to Rachel, to Shadow Creek, he meant to keep it, if he lived long enough. Tomway found him an hour later, sitting in what used to be the sheriff's office. The roof was half gone, and daylight streamed through holes in the walls, but the desk was still intact. Elias had pulled out his journal and was making notes, sketching defensive positions, calculating angles. You planning or praying? Tom asked. Planning. Praying's your department. I don't pray much anymore. Stopped making sense after the war. Which one? All of them. Tom sat on the edge of the ruined desk. I patched up a lot of men in my time. Saw a lot of them die despite everything I did. After a while, you start to wonder if anyone's listening to those prayers or if it's just noise. Dark way to look at it. You got a brighter perspective? Elias closed the journal. No, just a different one. I figure we're on our own out here. No cavalry coming, no divine intervention, just us and whatever we can build. That's bleaker than my version. Maybe, but it's honest. Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, The Chen brothers came to see me this morning, asked if I thought you were crazy. What did you tell them? That crazy and desperate look, pretty similar from the outside. Hard to tell which one you are. And which do you think I am? Both, probably. But that's what this place needs right now. Someone crazy enough to fight and desperate enough to win. Elias looked at him. You staying, then? Where else would I go? I'm too old to start over, too stubborn to quit. Besides, someone needs to patch up all the holes you keep putting in people. Appreciate it. Don't appreciate it yet. Wait until you see my bill. Tom stood to leave, then paused. Elias, that thing with the blasting powder yesterday. You really would have dropped it, wouldn't you? Killed yourself and everyone close. Honestly, I don't know. Didn't have to find out.
That's not reassuring.
Wasn't meant to be. After Tom left, Elias sat alone for a while longer, listening to the town slowly come back to life. Hammers on wood, voices calling to each other, the sound of people picking up pieces and trying to make them fit together again. He told Tom the truth. He really didn't know if he would have dropped that keg. Part of him hoped he would have found another way, talked Casper down, avoided the ultimate choice. But another part, the older part that remembered too many fights and too much blood, knew that sometimes there wasn't another way. Sometimes you had to be willing to burn it all down to save what mattered. The question was whether he could live with that, whether the man he was trying to become could coexist with the man he used to be. He didn't have an answer, so he did what he always did when answers weren't coming. He kept working. The salvage team left 2 days later. Elias led it personally, along with John Hastings, the Chen brothers, and 4 others who could handle themselves in a fight. They took 3 wagons and enough weapons to start a small war, which is exactly what they expected to run into. The mining camp was exactly where the map said it'd be. A collection of weathered buildings nestled in a canyon, abandoned but not picked clean yet. The equipment was still there. Drill bits, timber supports, winches, rope, tools, everything they needed to fortify Shadow Creek properly. Too easy, John muttered as they started loading the first wagon. Place like this should have been stripped bare by now. Maybe we got lucky. You believe in luck? Not particularly.
Then what do you believe in? Elias hefted a timber support onto the wagon. Preparation. And the idea that most people are lazier than they are smart. This camp's 40 miles from the nearest trail. Too much work to haul this stuff out for most scavengers. But not for us. We're motivated. They worked fast, loading anything that looked useful. The Chen brothers, Robert and James, had experience with mining equipment and sorted through it with practiced efficiency, calling out what to take and what to leave. By midday, they had 2 wagons full and were starting on the 3rd. That's when the riders appeared. 6 of them, coming down the canyon trail. Not Voss's crew. These had a different look. Younger, less professional. Opportunists who'd probably been watching the camp, waiting for someone stupid enough to try salvaging it. Elias set down the coil of rope he'd been carrying and walked to meet them. His hands stayed away from his guns, but the message in his posture was clear. Approach carefully. The lead rider was maybe 25, with a scar running from his eye to his jaw and an attitude that suggested he thought the world owed him something. He pulled up about 20 feet away and grinned. Well, look at this. Scavengers scavenging the scavengers' camp. That's got a nice ring to it. Camp's abandoned, Elias said. We're just taking what's left. See? That's where you're wrong, friend. We claimed this camp 2 weeks ago. Anything here belongs to us, including whatever you just loaded onto those wagons. You claiming it with what authority? The rider's grin widened. This authority. He pulled back his coat to show the guns at his hip. His friends did the same. 6 guns, Elias observed. That's decent authority. Here's the problem. We've got 8, and we're not in the mood to negotiate. That a threat? That's mathematics. You're outnumbered and outpositioned. We've got cover, high ground, and nothing to lose. You've got horses that'll bolt at the first gunshot and about 3 seconds to decide whether this is worth dying over. The scarred rider's grin faltered. He looked past Elias to where John and the Chen brothers had casually positioned themselves with rifles ready. Not pointed. That would have been aggressive. Just ready. You're pretty confident for a man who's outnumbered in the bigger picture, the rider said. We've got friends. Lots of them. They hear about this, they'll come looking. Then they'll find what's left of you, or they'll find nothing at all depending on how smart you are in the next 30 seconds. The standoff stretched. Elias could see the calculation happening behind the rider's eyes. Same calculation every bully made when they ran into someone who wouldn't fold. Was this worth the cost? Was pride worth blood? Apparently not. The rider spat into the dirt and pulled his horse around. This ain't over. Sure it is. You're riding away, we're loading our wagons, and everyone gets to live another day. That's as over as it gets. They watched the 6 riders disappear back up the canyon trail. John let out a breath he'd been holding. Think they'll actually come back with friends? Maybe. Probably not. Most men like that are all talk once you call their bluff.
Elias turned back to the wagons. But we finished loading fast, just in case. I want to be gone in an hour. They made it in 45 minutes, pushing hard. The wagons were heavy, and the trail back to Shadow Creek was rough, but they kept moving. Elias rode point, watching the ridgelines, looking for signs of pursuit. It came 3 hours later, but not from the direction he'd expected. The dust cloud appeared to the east, too large for 6 riders, too organized for a random gang. Elias called a halt and pulled out his field glasses. What he saw made his stomach drop. 20 riders, maybe 25, moving with military precision. "That's not the 6 from before," James Chen said quietly. "No, that's something worse." John's face went pale. "Casper. Or someone who learned from him. Either way, we can't outrun them, not with these wagons." "So what do we do?" Elias studied the terrain. They were in open ground, bad for defense, worse for running. But about a mile ahead, the trail passed through a narrow defile where the canyon walls pressed close. Tight quarters. Limited maneuverability. Not ideal, but better than dying in the open. "We make for the narrows," he said. "Position the wagons as barricades. Use the canyon walls for cover. Make them come at us where they can't spread out." "That's suicide. 25 to 8? It's tactics, and it's better than letting them run us down like rabbits." They pushed the horses hard, making for the narrows. The pursuing riders noticed the change and picked up speed, but they were too far back to catch up before Elias's team reached the defile. The wagons barely fit through the narrow passage, which was exactly what Elias wanted. They tipped the first one on its side, blocking the trail. The second they positioned 20 yards back, creating a second line. The third they kept mobile, ready to use as emergency cover or escape. "Spread out," Elias ordered. "High ground where you can get it. Overlapping fields of fire. Don't shoot until I give the signal." His team scattered into positions. The Chen brothers took the left wall. John and 2 others took the right. Elias stayed at ground level with the remaining man, a quiet prospector named Hayes, who'd barely said 10 words the whole trip, but handled his rifle like he'd been born with it. The pursuing riders appeared at the mouth of the defile 5 minutes later. They pulled up short when they saw the barricade, which meant they weren't stupid. A smart enemy was more dangerous than an aggressive one. The leader dismounted and walked forward slowly, hands visible and empty. Elias recognized the tactic. Show you're not immediately hostile, get a read on the situation, buy time to plan. He let the man get within talking distance before stepping out from behind the wagon. "That's far enough." The leader stopped. He was older than the men who'd tried to claim the camp, 40, maybe 45, with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen things, military bearing, professional. "You're Sheriff Crow." Not a question. Elias felt ice in his gut. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know you, or know of you anyway. Word travels in our line of work. Man who faced down Clayton Voss and Dutch Casper and lived to tell about it. That's worth knowing." "What do you want?" "Same thing every man wants. Money, safety, respect." The leader gestured at the wagons. "You're hauling valuable equipment through territory you don't control. That requires payment. Call it a toll, call it insurance. Call it whatever makes you feel better about paying it. And if I don't? Then we take it anyway. But it costs you men, costs us men. Seems inefficient when we could just do business." Elias studied him. This wasn't Voss's swagger or Casper's cold professionalism. This was something else. A businessman who happened to use violence as a business model, probably more dangerous than either of the others because he didn't take it personally. "How much?" Elias asked. "Half the wagons. You keep the rest. We call it square." "No deal. This equipment's going to Shadow Creek, all of it." "Then we got a problem." "We got a situation. Whether it's a problem depends on your math skills." Elias nodded toward the canyon walls where his people were positioned. "You've got numbers. We've got position. You can take us, but it'll cost you. Question is whether half a wagon of mining equipment is worth 5 or 6 of your men." The leader looked around, assessing positions, calculating odds. His expression didn't change, but Elias could see the gears turning. "You make a compelling argument, Sheriff, but here's my counter. I've got 30 men, not 25. The others are flanking your position right now. Should be in place in about..." He pulled out a pocket watch. 3 minutes. When they are, we'll have you surrounded. High ground won't matter. Position won't matter. You'll be in a kill box with nowhere to go. Elias felt his jaw tighten. Bluff or truth? The man's confidence suggested truth, and if he was telling it straight, they were about to be in serious trouble. "So here's my revised offer," the leader continued. "You give us one wagon now, walk away clean, or you wait 3 minutes and give us everything, including your lives." 2.5 minutes left, assuming he wasn't lying. Not enough time to scout, verify, reposition. Not enough time to do anything but make a choice. Elias looked back at his people. John was watching him, waiting for the signal to fight or flee. The Chen brothers were ready either way. Hayes had his rifle trained on the leader, patient as stone. They'd follow whatever call he made, fight a losing battle or surrender their hard-won supplies. Both choices cost something. Both hurt. But one kept them alive. "One wagon," Elias said. "Is there the third one? You take it and ride off. We don't see you again." The leader smiled. "Smart choice, Sheriff. Practical." "I'm known for it." They hauled out the equipment from the third wagon and stood back while the leader's men loaded it onto their horses. The whole operation took 10 minutes. Professional, efficient, almost respectful. Before he mounted up, the leader turned back to Elias. "Word of advice, Sheriff. Shadow Creek's getting a reputation. The place that fights back. That's admirable, but it's also dangerous. Makes you a target. Makes you proof of concept. Every gang wants to be the one that finally breaks you. We'll take our chances." "Will you?" "Because from where I stand, you're playing a losing game. You can't fight everyone, can't win every time. Eventually, someone's going to burn that town to the ground just to prove they could." "Maybe, but not today." The leader shrugged. "Not today," he agreed, "but soon. And when it happens, remember, you had a chance to walk away." They rode off with their prize, leaving Elias and his team standing in the defile with 2 wagons instead of 3. It felt like a defeat, even though everyone had survived. Maybe especially because everyone had survived. John walked up, his face tight. "We just let them rob us. We just stayed alive." "Same thing, isn't it? We backed down, paid tribute. That's what Voss wanted, what Casper wanted. We just did it for someone else. We made a tactical decision, kept most of what we came for. That's a fancy way of saying we lost." Elias didn't argue. John was right. They had lost. Not badly, but enough. Enough to taste it. Enough to remember. They rode back to Shadow Creek in silence, the 2 remaining wagons creaking under their loads. When they arrived at sunset, the whole town came out to see what they'd brought back. The cheers died when people realized they'd left with 3 wagons and returned with 2. Rachel found Elias that night in the ruins of the sheriff's office. He was working by lamplight, updating his journal with the day's events. She didn't say anything at first, just sat on the corner of the desk and waited. Finally, she said, "John told me what happened. Figured he would." "He's saying you're going soft, that the old Elias Crow wouldn't have backed down. The old Elias Crow got a lot of people killed over a lot less. So this was mercy. This was survival. There's a difference." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "You know what scares me? It's not that we lost a wagon. It's that next time it might be 2 wagons, then all 3, then our weapons, then our lives. Where does it stop, Elias? When do we stop giving ground? When the cost of giving it is worse than the cost of holding it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. That man, the leader today, he was right about one thing. Shadow Creek's got a reputation now. We can't take it back, can't make ourselves invisible again. So we either live up to that reputation or we die proving we can't. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're trying to thread a needle that keeps getting smaller, trying to be both the man who fights and the man who doesn't. Eventually, you're going to have to choose. After she left, Elias sat in the darkness for a long time. Outside, he could hear the town settling in for the night. Hammers had stopped. Voices had quieted. Just the wind and the creak of rebuilding. Rachel was right. He was trying to be 2 men at once. The sheriff who protected his town and the killer he'd sworn never to be again. And the space between those 2 identities was getting smaller every day. Soon there'd be no space at all. Soon he'd have to choose. But not tonight. Tonight he'd just sit in the dark and pretend he still had time to figure it out. Tomorrow would come soon enough. And with it, another test. Another choice. Another chance to discover which man he really was underneath all the pretending. The question was whether he'd like the answer when it finally came. The answer came 6 days later, delivered by a boy on a half-dead horse. Elias was working in the mine tunnels with Tom and the Chen brothers when word came down. They'd been reinforcing supports, mapping escape routes, turning the warren of abandoned shafts into something that could actually save lives. Hard, dirty work that left your back aching and your lungs full of dust. But it was honest, purposeful. The boy couldn't have been more than 15. His horse was foam-flecked and trembling, and when he slid out of the saddle, his legs barely held him. Rachel caught his arm before he fell. "Easy," she said. "When's the last time you ate?" "Don't matter. Got a message for the sheriff, for Crow." Elias climbed out of the tunnel entrance, blinking in the sudden sunlight. "I'm Crow." The boy looked him up and down, taking in the dust and sweat, the scarred hands, the revolver worn low. Whatever he'd been expecting, Elias apparently measured up because he straightened and delivered his message with practiced formality. "Clayton Voss sends his regards. Says to tell you he's coming back. 3 days from now. With enough men to finish what he started. Says you can run, you can fight, or you can surrender. But one way or another, Shadow Creek's done." The words dropped into the afternoon heat like stones into still water. Ripples spread. People nearby had heard, and they'd tell others, and within the hour everyone would know. "How many men?" Elias asked. "Didn't say exactly, but I saw the camp. Had to be 50, maybe more. Real fighters, not just saddle trash. He's been collecting debts, calling in favors. Built himself an army, 50 men, against Shadow Creek's 18 shooters, half of whom weren't trained soldiers. The math wasn't just bad. It was impossible." "Why'd you ride all this way to warn us?" Tom asked the boy. "You work for Voss?" "My pa does. Did. Voss killed him 2 days back when he objected to something. Figured telling you was the only revenge I'd get." The boy's voice cracked. "He's evil, mister. Pure evil. Whatever you done to make him mad, he's gonna make you pay triple." Elias pulled off his work gloves. "You got family? Somewhere to go?" "Got an aunt in New Mexico. Maybe." "Rachel, get him food and water, fresh horse from the livery, whatever supplies he needs for the ride." Elias looked at the boy. "You did a brave thing coming here. Your pa would be proud." The boy nodded, blinking back tears he was too young to hide properly. Rachel led him away toward what remained of the general store, already making plans, already moving. That was Rachel. Give her a problem, she solved it. No hesitation. Tom waited until they were out of earshot. 50 men. Elias, we can't. I know. Then what do we do? That was the question, wasn't it? 3 days to prepare for a force they couldn't hope to defeat. 3 days to decide whether to stand and die or scatter and survive. Elias looked around at Shadow Creek. They'd made progress since the last attack. New barricades, reinforced positions. The tunnel system was half mapped, but it wasn't enough. Wouldn't be enough against 50 professional killers who wanted blood. "Call everyone together," he said. "Town meeting, 1 hour. Everyone who's still here needs to hear this." And then they decide. All of them, together. "I'm not making this choice for people anymore." The town gathered in the open space where the church used to stand. 19 families had stayed after the second attack. Some had rebuilt. Some were living in tents and lean-tos. All of them looked tired, worn down by the constant threat, the endless preparation, the fear that wouldn't leave. Elias didn't sugarcoat it. "Clayton Voss is coming back, 3 days from now, with 50 men, maybe more. He's not looking to rob us or scare us anymore. He's looking to erase us, make an example that the whole frontier remembers." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Catherine Mills said what everyone was thinking. "We can't fight 50 men. No, we can't. So we run." That's one option. Pack what you can carry, scatter in different directions, hope Voss doesn't chase everyone. Some of you might make it, maybe most of you. What's the other option? This from John Hastings, his jaw set hard. "We make him not want to fight us." "How? We tried that with Casper, nearly died doing it." "We make the cost too high. Not just in blood. Voss has plenty of men to spend. We make it personal. Make it hurt in ways that matter to him." Sam Cartwright, still recovering from his wounds, spoke up from where he sat with his bandaged hand. "You're talking about going on offense, hitting him before he hits us. I'm talking about changing the game. Right now, Voss thinks this is simple. Overwhelming force against a weak target. We make it complicated, messy, dangerous in ways he doesn't expect. Rachel's voice cut through the murmurs. You're talking about ambush, about taking the fight to him. I'm talking about survival, which means doing whatever it takes. That's not defense anymore, Elias. That's war. War's already here, has been since Voss first rode in. We're just finally admitting it. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable with the implications. This wasn't a conversation about protecting their homes anymore. This was about becoming the thing they'd been fighting against, about stepping across a line they couldn't uncross. Tomway stood up. I've fought in 3 wars. Know what they all had in common? Both sides thought they were the good ones, thought they were justified, thought the other side forced their hand. He looked at Elias. You're asking us to become killers, not defenders, killers. To go out there and murder men in the dark before they murder us in the daylight. That's what ambush is. That's what war is. And I need to know if you understand what you're asking. Elias met his gaze. I understand. Do you? Because once we cross that line, there's no going back. We won't be the town that fought off bandits. We'll be the town that massacred them, and every gang, every outlaw, every violent bastard from here to California will come looking to prove they're harder than us. They're already coming, Tom. That message doesn't change whether we fight clean or dirty. It just changes whether we're alive when it's over. And what about after? What kind of town do we become? The kind that survives. The debate raged for an hour. Some wanted to scatter immediately, take their chances on the trail rather than wait for Voss's army. Others wanted to fortify and defend, go down fighting if they had to go down. A few, led by John Hastings, wanted to follow Elias's plan. Hit first, hit hard, make Voss bleed before he ever reached Shadow Creek. In the end, they voted, not because it was fair or right, but because Elias made them. Forced them to own the decision collectively instead of letting him carry it alone. 15 voted to evacuate. 12 voted to stay and fight. Split almost down the middle, which was worse than a clear mandate either way. Elias waited until the votes were counted, then spoke again. Anyone who wants to leave, you go with my blessing. No judgment, no shame. Take what supplies you need and get moving. Those who stay, we prepare. We train. And in 3 days, we make Voss regret every decision that brought him back here. That night, 7 families packed their belongings and left. They moved quietly, almost ashamed, but Elias made a point of seeing them off personally. Shook hands. Wished them luck. Meant it. By dawn, Shadow Creek's population had dropped to 12 families. 43 people total, 18 who could shoot, the rest too young, too old, or too injured. Against 50 professional killers. Rachel found him watching the sunrise from the hill where they'd buried Marcus Webb. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him in the cold morning air. Finally, she said, You think we're going to die, don't you? Probably. Then why stay? Why not leave with the others? Because running doesn't fix the problem, just postpones it. Voss will find another town do the same thing. Someone has to stop him. And you think that someone is you. I think I'm the only one here who knows how. Because of who you used to be. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me. You promised you would, and we're probably about to die. I'd like to know who I'm dying beside. So Elias told her. Not everything. Some stories were too dark to share even facing death, but enough. About the years after the war when he'd hired his gun to whoever paid. About the towns he'd helped destroy, the people he'd killed for money or pride, or just because someone pointed him in that direction. About the day he'd looked at his reflection and couldn't recognize the man staring back. I walked away from it, he said, buried that life, took a new name, came to Shadow Creek to be something different. Thought maybe I could make up for some of what I'd done by protecting instead of destroying. And now? Now I'm about to use every skill I learned in that old life to kill as many of Voss's men as I can. Funny how that works. That's not funny. That's tragedy. Maybe. But it's also necessity. Rachel looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I don't forgive you for what you were, but I understand why you're doing this. And for what it's worth, the man you're trying to be, he's worth saving too. Even if saving him means becoming the man he used to be? I think maybe you've always been both. You just finally stopped pretending otherwise. She walked back down the hill, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts and the ghosts of men he used to know. Men who'd taught him how to kill efficiently. Men who died because they weren't quite efficient enough. He was about to become one of them again. The only question was whether he'd be good enough to survive it. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Elias divided his remaining fighters into 3 teams. Team 1 would stay in Shadow Creek, maintaining the illusion of defense, making Voss think they were dug in and waiting. Team 2 would position in the mine tunnels, ready to strike from unexpected angles if the attack came to town. Team 3, Elias, Tom, the Chen brothers, and John Hastings, would go hunting. They spent the daylight hours mapping Voss's approach routes, finding places where the terrain narrowed, where an army would have to compress itself to pass through. They placed markers, memorized distances, planned firing positions. At night they rested in shifts, keeping watch, staying sharp. "This is insane," John said on the second night. They were camped in a ravine 5 miles from Shadow Creek, close to the most likely approach route. 5 of us against 50. We get 1 volley, maybe 2, then they'll be on us. "We're not trying to win," Elias reminded him. "We're trying to make it expensive." "What's the difference?" "Winning means we destroy them. Making it expensive means we hurt them bad enough that continuing costs more than quitting." Tom poked at the small fire they'd built in a depression that hid the light. "You're assuming Voss thinks like a businessman. What if this is personal for him? What if he doesn't care about the cost?" "Then we hurt him anyway. At least we go down taking pieces of him with us." James Chen spoke up. He was the quieter of the 2 brothers, the one who thought before talking. "There's another possibility. We don't just hurt his men. We hurt his reputation." "How?" "Voss built his power on the idea that he can't be beaten, that towns pay or burn, and there's no third option. We become that third option. We make him look weak, make other towns think they can resist too." "That's the long game," Elias said. "We might not live to see it pay off. But if we do it right, Shadow Creek becomes a symbol. The place that said no and survived. That's worth more than a few dead outlaws." Robert Chen nodded. "My brother's right. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every town that comes after, every family that refuses to pay tribute." Elias looked at them. These men who'd chosen to follow him into probable death, who'd stayed when they could have run, who talked about legacy when they should have been talking about survival. He'd spent 2 years trying to be worthy of their trust. Now he was about to test whether he actually was. "All right," he said. "Then we make it count. We make Voss remember Shadow Creek every time he closes his eyes." They moved into position before dawn on the 3rd day. The approach route Elias had predicted was a narrow canyon that funneled between 2 ridges. Any force coming from the east would have to pass through it. The alternative routes added a full day to the journey. They dug in on the high ground. Elias and Tom on the north ridge, the Chen brothers on the south, John in a concealed position at the canyon mouth to signal when Voss's force entered. Their rifles were loaded, their positions reinforced with rocks for cover. They had enough ammunition for maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire. Then they'd have to run. 10 minutes to change the equation. The waiting was the hard part. Elias had learned that lesson in a dozen different conflicts. The moment before violence always stretched longer than the violence itself. Your mind played tricks. Your hands got sweaty. You second-guessed every choice that brought you to this moment. He controlled his breathing, centered himself, became the man he'd sworn never to be again, and found it easier than it should have been. The sun climbed toward midday. Then John's signal came, a single mirror flash from his position. They were coming. Elias raised his field glasses and watched the canyon mouth. Riders appeared in 1s and 2s, scouts checking the route. They moved carefully, professionally. After they passed through and reported back, the main force began entering. Voss rode near the front, recognizable even at distance by his gray gelding and confident posture. Behind him came an army. Not 50 men, more like 60, maybe 65. An overwhelming force by any measure. Elias lowered the glasses and looked across the canyon to where Robert Chen was positioned. They'd agreed on the signal. When Voss's force was fully committed to the canyon, when retreat would be as dangerous as advancing, that's when they'd strike. The riders kept coming, 30 men in the canyon now, 40, 50. Elias raised his rifle. Across the canyon, he saw Robert do the same. 60 men, the last few stragglers entering. Elias sighted on a rider near the back. Not Voss, not the leaders. They'd target the rear, create chaos, make the force bunch up and panic. He took a breath, let it out halfway, felt his finger settle on the trigger, and something inside him whispered that this was the moment. The choice Rachel had said was coming. The line between the man he wanted to be and the man he'd always been. He squeezed. The shot echoed across the canyon like thunder. The rider he'd targeted spun and fell. Before the body hit the ground, 4 more shots rang out. Tom, Robert, James, all firing in sequence. 5 men down in 3 seconds. Then all hell broke loose. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Elias worked his rifle like a machine, not thinking, just executing. Sight, breathe, fire. Load, sight, breathe, fire. Every shot deliberate, every shot counting. Beside him, Tom did the same. Below, Voss's force scattered into chaos. Men dove for cover that didn't exist. Horses screamed and bolted. Return fire hammered the ridges, but it was panicked, uncoordinated. They couldn't see where the shots were coming from. Elias counted rounds in his head. 12 gone. 18. 24. Down in the canyon, bodies littered the ground. Not all dead, some wounded, crying out. Maybe 8 down completely, another dozen hit but mobile. A fifth of Voss's force in less than 2 minutes. But now they were organizing. Voss's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Men dismounted, took cover behind rocks and dead horses. Return fire got more organized, more dangerous. A round spanged off the rock inches from Elias's head, spraying him with fragments. "Time to move!" Tom shouted. They grabbed their rifles and ran, staying low, using the ridgeline for cover. Behind them, Voss's men poured fire into their former positions. But Elias and his team were already 50 yards away, heading for their second positions. The plan was to hit and fade, strike again from a different angle, keep Voss's force off balance and bleeding. Make every mile toward Shadow Creek cost him men. They repositioned in a cluster of boulders overlooking the canyon exit. Voss's force was regrouping, tending wounded, checking bodies. The chaos had settled into grim professionalism. They'd been hurt, but not broken. Elias counted the remaining riders. 53, give or take. They'd killed maybe 6, wounded another dozen. Not enough to stop them, but enough to make them cautious. Voss appeared, walking among his men, radiating controlled fury. Even from a distance, Elias could see the calculation in his movements. He was smart enough to know this was just the beginning, that the canyon had been a trap, and Shadow Creek would be worse. The question was whether he'd keep coming anyway. Voss answered it by mounting his horse and pointing toward Shadow Creek. The army moved out, slower now, more careful. They left their dead behind, no time for burial. The wounded who could ride went with them. The ones who couldn't got a bullet and a shallow grave. Professional. Brutal. Efficient. Elias watched them go, then looked at his team. Nobody was hurt, but they all looked different than they had an hour ago. Harder. Older. "We hit them again before they reach town," Elias said. 2 miles from here, there's another narrow spot. No, Tom interrupted. "What?" "No more ambushes. We've made our point. Hurt them, slowed them down. But they're still coming, and we're down to half our ammunition. We go back to Shadow Creek, prepare the final defense. We can kill more of them, reduce the odds. We can die trying. That doesn't help anyone." Tom's voice was firm. "You promised we'd make it expensive. We did. Now we make our stand where we plan to make it, at home, with the rest of our people." Elias wanted to argue, wanted to press the advantage, keep hunting, keep killing until Voss's force was too small to threaten anyone. But Tom was right. They'd done what they came to do. Anything more was suicide driven by bloodlust, not tactics. The old Elias, the one he'd been trying to bury, would have kept hunting, would have killed until there was nothing left to kill or he was the one dead. The new Elias, the one Shadow Creek needed, knew when to stop. "All right," he said, "we head back. Prepare the defense." They made it to Shadow Creek 2 hours before Voss's force arrived. The remaining townspeople had used the time well. The barricades were reinforced. The tunnel entrances were hidden. Shooters were positioned in overlapping fields of fire. Rachel met them at the edge of town. "We heard shooting. Thought you were dead." "Close enough? They're coming. Maybe 50 left, plus or minus, angry, hurt, and looking for payback. Then we give them the fight they're looking for.
Elias looked at Shadow Creek, this dying town that had become worth dying for. The people positioned at windows and behind barriers, the families hidden in the tunnels, the desperate hope that somehow they'd survive this. "No," he said. "We give them something better." "What?" "A reason to quit." He gathered everyone who could hear him and laid out the final plan. It wasn't about killing the most men. It wasn't about heroic last stands. It was about psychology, about making Voss choose between pride and survival. "They expect us to fight to the death," Elias said. "So we don't. We fight smart. We make them hurt. And then, when they're bleeding and tired and wondering if this is worth it, we offer them a way out." "They won't take it," John said. "Voss came for blood. Voss came to make an example. But examples only matter if someone's alive to tell the story. We kill enough of his men, make it clear we won't stop fighting, and suddenly burning Shadow Creek doesn't accomplish anything. He'll be too weak to impress anyone." "That's a hell of a gamble." "Everything we've done has been a gamble. This is just the last one." The force that rode into Shadow Creek that afternoon was different from the one that had come before. Harder. Meaner. Men who'd been ambushed in a canyon and left friends bleeding in the dirt. Men who wanted revenge. They didn't charge in like Casper's crew. They approached methodically, covering angles, ready for traps. Voss had learned, but so had Shadow Creek. The first shots came from the tunnels, hidden positions that opened up on Voss's flanks, catching 3 men before they could react. The return fire was immediate and heavy, but the shooters were already gone, fading back into the tunnels, disappearing. Voss's men advanced on the barricades, and Shadow Creek's defenders opened up. Not wild shooting, controlled fire, making every round count. Men fell. Others took cover. The advance stalled. Then Voss brought up his own rifles, and the real war began. Bullets tore through Shadow Creek's defenses. The barricades held, but barely. Windows shattered, walls splintered. One of the Chen brothers took a round through the shoulder and had to fall back. Elias moved between positions, directing fire, calling targets, keeping people focused. This was what he'd trained for in another life. This was what he'd been good at before he'd tried to become something else. And it was working. Voss's force was taking casualties, 8 down, maybe 10. But so was Shadow Creek. 2 wounded, 1 dead. Sam Cartwright, still recovering from his previous injuries, had taken a shot through the chest. He died before Tom could reach him. The battle raged for an hour. Then 2. Shadow Creek gave ground slowly, falling back to secondary positions, making Voss fight for every inch. But they were running out of inches, running out of ammunition, running out of time. That's when Elias made his move. He grabbed a white cloth, torn from his own shirt, and tied it to a piece of wood. Then he stood up, exposing himself, waving it. "Hold fire!" he shouted. "Voss, Clayton Voss, I want to talk!" The shooting tapered off. Confused silence fell over the battlefield. Voss appeared from behind cover, his face a mask of fury and suspicion. "You want to surrender?" he called back. "I want to negotiate." "Nothing to negotiate. You die or you run. Those are the options." "Wrong. You've lost 12 men, maybe 15. You've got wounded who need attention, and Shadow Creek's still standing, still fighting. You can win, probably. But it's going to cost you another 10 men, maybe 20. And for what? There's nothing here worth taking. The mine's dry. The town's half burned already. All you get is a pile of ashes and a lot of dead friends." Voss's expression didn't change, but Elias could see him thinking, see the calculation happening. "Here's my offer," Elias continued. "You ride out, now. Take your wounded and leave. You don't get Shadow Creek, but you don't lose any more men either. You tell people you decided we weren't worth the effort. That's not quite a win, but it's not a loss either. And what do you get? We get to keep existing, keep defending our home, keep being the place that said no to you and lived. That's not a deal. That's you begging for mercy. Then shoot me and keep fighting. See how many more of your men die before you burn a town that's already half ashes. See if that makes you look strong or desperate." The standoff stretched. Voss stood there, rifle in hand, pride warring with practicality. His men watched, waiting for the signal to finish this, and Elias stood exposed, betting his life that Voss was smart enough to take the out he was offering. Finally, Voss lowered his rifle. "You got lucky, Crow. That's all this is. Luck and my generous nature."
Call it whatever helps you sleep. But I want you to know something. Voss's voice dropped, deadly quiet. This isn't over. Maybe not today, not this year. But someday I'm coming back. And when I do, there won't be any negotiation. There won't be any mercy. Just fire and blood until Shadow Creek is a name people forget. I'll be here waiting. Voss smiled, cold and terrible. I'm counting on it. He mounted his horse and gestured to his men. They collected their wounded, left their dead, and rode out. Slower than they'd arrived, bloodied, but alive. Shadow Creek watched them go in silence. Nobody cheered, nobody celebrated. They just stood in the ruins of their town, surrounded by bodies and broken buildings, trying to process what had just happened. They'd survived. Again. Barely. But at what cost? Sam Cartwright's funeral was held at sunset the day after Voss rode out. They buried him on the hill next to Marcus Webb, which felt wrong in a way Elias couldn't articulate. Sam had been part of Shadow Creek for 15 years, had opinions about everything, had a wife who died of fever 3 winters back and no children to carry his name forward. Now he was just another body in hard ground, another cost that someone had to tally. Catherine Mills spoke over the grave, reading from a worn Bible even though Sam hadn't been particularly religious. It was just what you did. Words to fill the silence, ritual to pretend death meant something more than absence. Elias stood apart from the group, watching. He'd killed men before, too many to count, too many to remember their faces. But Sam's death sat different. Sam hadn't been an enemy or a target. He'd been a man defending his home, and he died because Elias's plans hadn't been good enough to save him. You thinking it's your fault? Rachel asked quietly. She'd appeared beside him without sound, the way she always did. Thinking it's complicated. That's not an answer. Sam made his choice. Stayed when he could have left. Fought when he could have hidden. I didn't force him into anything. But you gave him something to fight for. That's the same thing, isn't it? Elias looked at her. You blaming me? No, just wondering if you're blaming yourself. She was quiet for a moment. Sam told me something before the fight. Said he was glad he stayed. Said his whole life he'd been calculating profit margins and playing it safe. And for once he wanted to stand for something, even if it killed him. It did. Yeah, but he meant it. That's worth something. The funeral ended. People drifted back toward town in small groups, talking quietly. Tom Way stayed behind, filling in the grave himself, refusing help. It was his way of processing. Physical labor to distract from things that couldn't be fixed. Elias started walking, not toward town, but away from it. Up the ridge toward the high ground where he could see for miles. Rachel followed without asking permission. What now? She said when they reached the summit. Now we rebuild. Again. Figure out how to live with what we've become. And what have we become? The town that fights back. The place Voss warned about. Every gang within 500 miles knows our name now. Knows we're dangerous. That's what we wanted, right? To be too expensive to attack? Is it working? Elias studied the horizon. 3 battles. 3 victories, if you could call surviving with massive losses a victory. But Voss was right. This wasn't over. Someone would always come testing, pushing, trying to be the one who finally broke Shadow Creek. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe we just delayed the inevitable. Maybe all we did was buy time. Time's not nothing. Every day we're still standing is a day someone else sees and thinks maybe they can stand too. That's what James Chen said. We're not just fighting for ourselves. That's supposed to make me feel better about Sam? No, nothing makes that better, but it makes it mean something. They stood in silence, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of red and gold. Beautiful, in a harsh kind of way. The same landscape that had been here before Shadow Creek existed and would be here long after the town was forgotten. You know what scares me most? Rachel said finally. It's not the fighting, not the dying. It's that we're getting used to it. 2 months ago, the idea of shooting someone would have kept me up at night. Now I can do it and go eat dinner. What does that make us? Survivors. Or monsters who got good at pretending otherwise. Elias didn't have an answer for that. The line between survivor and monster had always been thinner than people wanted to believe. He'd crossed it before. Might be crossing it again, slower this time, but crossing it nonetheless. Tell me something, Rachel said. When you held up that white flag yesterday, when you offered Voss that deal, were you really trying to save lives?
Or were you just trying to avoid becoming the man you used to be? The question cut deeper than any bullet. Elias turned it over in his mind, looking for the honest answer instead of the comfortable one. Both, he said. I was trying to save lives because it was the smart play. But yeah, part of me was looking for an out, a way to stop before I went too far. And if Voss hadn't taken the deal, if he'd kept fighting, then I would have killed every single one of them I could reach. No hesitation, no mercy, just efficiency. That's what I thought. Rachel's voice was soft, not judgmental. You're still two men, Elias, the killer and the sheriff. Question is whether they can exist in the same skin without one destroying the other. I don't know if they can. Then figure it out, because Shadow Creek needs both of them right now. She walked back down the hill, leaving Elias alone with the sunset in his thoughts. Below, the town was already starting repairs. Hammers on wood, voices calling measurements. The sound of people refusing to quit even when quitting made sense. He'd come to Shadow Creek to escape who he'd been, to prove he could be something different, but the last 2 months had stripped away that pretense. He wasn't different. He was just the same man in a different context, using the same skills for allegedly better reasons. The question Rachel had asked, whether the killer and the sheriff could coexist, that wasn't really the question. They already coexisted. They always had. The real question was whether Elias could live with that truth, whether he could look in the mirror and accept that he'd always be both, and whether that was enough. The next week passed in a blur of work and waiting. They rebuilt what they could with what they had. The general store got a new front wall. The boarding house got patched enough to be weather-tight. The church stayed gone, no time or resources to rebuild it, and maybe nobody quite ready to try. More families left. 3 more packed up and headed for Tucson or California or anywhere that wasn't Shadow Creek. Nobody blamed them. The ones who stayed, 9 families now, 32 people, weren't the ones who saw a future here. They were the ones who couldn't imagine a future anywhere else. John Hastings' daughter had nightmares every night, woke up screaming about fire and gunshots. Catherine Mills drank more than she used to, and her hands shook when she thought nobody was watching. Tom Way moved slower, like something inside him had cracked and wouldn't quite heal right. They were all damaged, all carrying scars that didn't show. But they kept working, kept building, kept preparing for the next threat even though nobody knew when it would come or what shape it would take. Elias spent his days training the remaining fighters, teaching them things he'd learned in places he tried not to remember. How to read terrain, how to set up crossfire, how to think like the men who'd be coming to kill them. Some of them learned fast, others struggled. But they all tried, which was more than he had any right to expect. At night, he updated his journal, adding to the record he'd been keeping since he arrived. It had started as a practical document, lists of residents, inventory of resources, but it had evolved into something else. A history of Shadow Creek's transformation from dying mining town to something harder to define. A testament to what people could become when they stopped accepting the world as it was and started fighting for what it should be. He didn't know if anyone would ever read it. Didn't know if it mattered. But he kept writing anyway, because recording it felt like making it real. Making it count. 2 weeks after Voss left, a rider appeared on the Eastern Trail. Alone, moving slow, hands visible and empty. The watch spotted him and rang the alarm bell. Not the attack bell, the stranger bell. Different tone, different meaning. Elias met him at the edge of town with Rachel and Tom flanking him, rifles ready but not aimed. The rider was middle-aged, weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent his whole life in the saddle. He stopped 20 feet out and called, "Sheriff Crow?" "That's me." "Name's Walker, Daniel Walker. I rode 3 days to get here. Need to talk to you about something important." "You can talk from there." Walker nodded, understanding the caution. "Fair enough. I'm mayor of a town called Copper Ridge, 50 miles southeast of here. We heard about what you did, about Voss, about Casper, about how you stood up to them and survived. And we're in trouble. Same kind of trouble you were in. Gang moved into our territory last month, started demanding tribute. We paid once, figured they'd move on. But they didn't. They keep coming back, demanding more. We don't have more to give." Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. "What do you want from me?" "Help? Advice? Hell, I don't know. Just something. You figured out how to fight them, how to survive. We need to know how you did it." Rachel spoke up. "We barely survived.
Lost half our town. Good people died. But you survived. That's more than most towns can say. More than Copper Ridge can say if things keep going the way they're going. Walker's voice cracked slightly. Please, I've got a wife and 2 daughters. Everyone in my town has someone they're trying to protect. We need help. Elias looked at Rachel, then Tom. They both wore the same expression, exhausted sympathy mixed with the knowledge that they couldn't afford to extend themselves. Shadow Creek was barely holding together. They didn't have resources to spare for other towns, no matter how desperate. But he also saw something else in their faces, the understanding that this was what they'd fought for. Not just Shadow Creek's survival, but the idea that towns didn't have to roll over for men like Voss. That resistance was possible. I can't come to Copper Ridge, Elias said. Can't spare the people or the time, but I can give you information. Tell you what worked for us, what didn't. Show you how to set up defenses, train your people, make yourselves expensive to attack. Walker's face lit up. That's all I'm asking, just a chance. They spent 3 days working with Walker. Elias shared his journal, let him copy the defensive positions, the tactical notes, the lessons learned in blood. Rachel taught him about organization, how to get people working together instead of panicking separately. Tom showed him basic field medicine, how to treat gunshot wounds with limited supplies. When Walker left, he carried with him everything Shadow Creek had learned, and a message. Tell other towns, Elias said. Tell them what we did here. Not the glory version, the real version, the pain and the cost and the sacrifice, but also tell them it's possible. Tell them they don't have to be victims. I will. And Sheriff? Thank you. You might have just saved my family. Or I might have just taught you how to get them killed slower. Only way to know is to try. Walker rode out, and Elias watched him go with a feeling he couldn't quite name. Not pride exactly, more like purpose. The sense that maybe Sam's death and all the other costs they'd paid meant something beyond Shadow Creek's survival. You know what you just did, right? Tom said quietly. You just started something. Other towns are going to hear about this. They're going to come asking for help, asking you to be, I don't know, a symbol, a leader. I'm not a leader, I'm just a man who got stubborn in the right place. That's how leaders start. Elias shook his head. I didn't do this to become something. I did it because the alternative was unacceptable. The reason doesn't change the result. 3 more riders appeared over the next month, each from a different town, each with the same story. Gangs demanding tribute, towns that couldn't pay, people looking for hope or at least a fighting chance. Elias met with all of them, shared what he knew, sent them home with copies of his notes and the understanding that survival wasn't guaranteed. Some would make it, some wouldn't. That was the ugly truth nobody wanted to say out loud. Shadow Creek kept rebuilding, slowly, painfully. The church got a new foundation started. Not much, just cornerstones, but it was something. Catherine Mills sobered up and started teaching the younger kids to read and write. John Hastings' daughter still had nightmares, but she'd started sleeping through some nights. The town was healing, or maybe just scarring over, hard to tell the difference sometimes. 4 months after Voss's final attack, word came from Copper Ridge. They'd been hit by the gang Walker had warned about, but they'd held, used the defenses Elias taught them, stood together, made it too expensive for the gang to continue. The Outlaws had moved on to easier prey. Rachel brought Elias the letter with a strange expression on her face. They're calling you the sheriff who started a movement. Says here that 5 more towns have organized defenses based on what you taught Walker. That's dangerous. Makes them targets. Maybe, but it also makes them survivors instead of victims. There's value in that. Elias read the letter twice, looking for some feeling to attach to it. Pride seemed wrong. People were still dying in these fights. Satisfaction seemed worse. He'd taught them violence, even if it was defensive violence. But there was something there, a sense that the pattern was breaking, that the frontier's unwritten rule, pay the bandits or burn, was being rewritten, not by heroes, not by cavalry, or federal marshals, or any kind of official intervention, but by ordinary people who'd decided they were tired of being prey. You think it'll hold? Rachel asked. This thing you've started? I think it'll last until something stronger comes along. But maybe that's enough. Maybe just showing it's possible, that's the point. That's not the Elias Crow I met 2 years ago talking. That man thought small, thought local. This sounds like you're thinking bigger. Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching good people die because they didn't know they had a choice. You do realize what you've become, right? You came here trying to escape being a killer, trying to be just a small-town sheriff. But you've become something else. Something the frontier's never really seen before. What's that? A teacher. Someone who shows people they don't have to accept the way things are. That's more dangerous than any gunfighter ever was. She was right, though Elias had been trying not to think about it. He'd spent 2 years running from his past, trying to be invisible, trying to prove he could be something other than the man who killed for money. But he'd ended up becoming something that might be more threatening to men like Voss than any gunfighter, someone who made their business model obsolete. That night, alone in his rebuilt office, Elias pulled out his journal and read through it from the beginning. The early entries were sparse, practical, lists and numbers, but they'd evolved into something else, a record of transformation. Not just Shadow Creek's, but his own. He'd come here broken, trying to hide from what he'd been. He'd thought redemption meant becoming something completely different, leaving the killer behind and becoming only the protector. But that wasn't how it worked. The killer and the protector weren't separate people. They were the same person using the same skills for different purposes. The violence was the same. The efficiency was the same. Only the reason had changed, and maybe that was enough. Maybe redemption wasn't about becoming something new. Maybe it was about using what you were, all of it, the dark and the light, for something worth the cost. He started writing a new entry, different from the tactical notes and resource lists. This one was personal. I came to Shadow Creek to die, he wrote. Not literally, maybe, but death by anonymity, death by irrelevance. I thought if I could just disappear, become someone forgettable, the weight of what I'd done would disappear too. I was wrong. The weight never leaves. You just learn to carry it differently. The question isn't whether you can escape who you were. It's whether you can make who you were matter for something beyond yourself. I don't know if I've done that, but Shadow Creek stands. Other towns are standing. That's more than I expected when I started. He paused, then added, Sam died defending his home. Marcus died trying to warn us. Others will die in the fights to come. I can't undo those deaths, can't make them matter less. But I can make sure they mattered, that their choice to stand and fight changed something. That's not redemption, but it's close enough to live with. 6 months after Voss's retreat, the man himself appeared again. Not with an army this time. Alone, riding that same gray gelding, looking older and harder than before. The watch spotted him and rang the alarm. Within minutes, Shadow Creek's defenders were positioned, ready for whatever came next. But Voss just rode straight up the main street like he owned it, hands visible, no weapons drawn. Elias met him in front of the rebuilt general store. Rachel and Tom flanked him, but he held up a hand when they started to raise their rifles. Let's hear what he has to say. Voss dismounted and stood 10 feet away, studying Shadow Creek with an expression Elias couldn't read. Not quite respect, not quite hatred. Something else. Town looks good, Voss said finally. Better than I expected. Thought you'd be ashes by now. Turns out we're harder to burn than we look, so I've noticed. Voss was quiet for a moment. You cost me, Crow. Cost me men, cost me reputation, cost me business. Towns that used to pay started saying no. Figured if Shadow Creek could resist, why couldn't they? You know how much money I've lost because of you? Should I apologize? No. You should understand what you've done. You didn't just defend your town, you broke the system, made it unstable. Now I've got to work 3 times as hard for half the profit, and I've got sheriffs from towns I've never heard of coming at me with guns because some bastard in Arizona showed them it was possible. Sounds like a personal problem. Voss smiled, but there was no humor in it. It is. And I thought about solving it. Thought about bringing 100 men next time. Burning Shadow Creek so thoroughly nobody would remember it existed, making an example that'd last a generation. But you didn't. No. Because I ran the numbers, figured out what it'd actually cost to break you now that you've dug in, now that you've got support from other towns, now that you're not just defending but teaching. And you know what I realized? It's not worth it. You've made yourself too expensive for what you're worth. Elias felt something shift in his chest. Not victory. This wasn't victory. But maybe validation. The strategy had worked. They'd made themselves survive by making themselves too painful to kill. "So why are you here?" he asked. "To tell you face to face that you won. Not because you beat me, you didn't, but because you changed the game to the point where I can't play it the old way anymore. Congratulations, Sheriff. You're the first man who ever made me quit without killing me. I'll try not to let it go to my head. You should, because you need to understand what comes next. I'm out, moving my operation further west, away from all this resistance bullshit you've inspired. But other men will come. Meaner men. Dumber men. Men who don't care about costs or calculations, who just want to prove they can do what I couldn't, and when they come, all your tactical brilliance won't matter. Because eventually you'll run into someone who's willing to die just to take you with them. Then I guess we'll deal with that when it comes." Voss studied him for a long moment. "You really believe that, don't you? That you can just keep fighting forever?" "I believe I can keep fighting as long as it matters. After that, someone else's problem." "Brave, stupid, but brave." Voss mounted his horse. "One more thing. That canyon ambush, where you hit us from the ridges. That was good work. Professional. Made me wonder who you really were before you became Sheriff Crow. Nobody important. We both know that's a lie. But I'll let you keep it." Voss tipped his hat, a gesture more mocking than respectful. "See you in hell, Sheriff." "Not if I see you first." Voss rode out, and Shadow Creek watched him go in silence. It felt like an ending, though Elias knew better. Voss was right. Other threats would come. Other men testing themselves against Shadow Creek's reputation. The fight wasn't over, but this chapter was. That evening, the whole town gathered in the open space where the church used to be. Not for a funeral this time. For something else. Something they'd been too busy surviving to consider until now. Catherine Mills stood up first. "I've been thinking about what we are now, what Shadow Creek means. We're not really a mining town anymore. The mine's dead. We're not really a normal town. Normal towns don't fight wars every few months, so what are we?" "We're survivors," John Hastings said. "We're more than that." This from James Chen. "We're proof. Proof that you don't have to accept things as they are. That ordinary people can stand up to extraordinary violence and live." Rachel looked at Elias. "You've been writing everything down. The tactics, the costs, the lessons. What are you going to do with all that?" Elias had been asking himself the same question. The journal had grown to 3 volumes now, filled with everything Shadow Creek had learned. It was too valuable to keep hidden, too important to let die with him. "I'm going to share it," he said. "Anyone who comes asking, anyone who needs it, they get copies. Free, no conditions, just the information and the hope it saves some lives." "That's going to make you famous," Tom said. "Or infamous. Hard to tell which. Don't care about famous, I care about useful. This town paid in blood for what we learned. Least we can do is make sure that blood bought something for others, too." Catherine stood up again. "Then I say we make it official. Shadow Creek isn't just a town anymore. It's a school. We teach people how to defend themselves, how to organize, how to survive. We become the place people come when they're tired of being victims." The murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. It wasn't unanimous. Some people just wanted to live quietly, tend their rebuilding, forget the violence. But enough agreed that it felt like a decision. Shadow Creek would become something new. Not a hiding place, but a beacon. Not running from the frontier's violence, but standing against it, teaching others to do the same. It was dangerous. It was audacious. It was probably stupid. But it was also exactly the kind of thing that made sense in a place like Shadow Creek. The next morning, Elias stood in his office, rebuilt now, sturdy, and looked at his reflection in the window glass. The man staring back wasn't the one who'd arrived 2 years ago, trying to disappear. And he wasn't the killer from before that, selling his skills to the highest bidder. He was something else, something he didn't have a name for yet. Rachel appeared in the doorway. "You ready?" "For what?" "Whatever comes next. Because people are already talking. Towns are already sending representatives. You're about to be very busy teaching people how to not die. Could think of worse ways to spend a life. Could think of easier ones, too. Easier's not always better." She smiled. "There's the Elias Crow I know, the one who makes terrible choices sound reasonable." They walked outside together into the morning light. Shadow Creek spread out before them, scarred, rebuilt, stubborn. A town that should have died but refused, that should have quit but kept standing, not because of one man with a gun and a past he couldn't escape, but because ordinary people had decided they were worth defending, had learned that survival wasn't about accepting the world as it was, but about making it into what it should be. Elias had come here to hide, to pretend he could be something other than what he was. He'd learned that was impossible. The violence was part of him, the skills, the instincts, the willingness to do what needed doing, all of it was woven into who he was. But he'd also learned that those things weren't inherently evil. They were tools, and tools took their morality from how they were used. He'd use them to protect instead of destroy, to teach instead of terrorize, to build instead of burn. That wasn't redemption. He wasn't naive enough to think he could wash away years of blood with a few months of noble intentions. But it was something. A different path than the one he'd been walking, a better use of the man he'd become. 2 riders appeared on the Eastern Trail, representatives from another town probably, come seeking the knowledge Shadow Creek had paid for in blood. Elias watched them approach and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile for this harsh place, but purpose. The understanding that what he did mattered, that the choices he made rippled outward, changed things, made the frontier a little less dark than it had been. "You gonna talk to them?" Rachel asked, nodding at the approaching riders. "Yeah. Going to tell them the truth, that survival costs, that there's no easy way, that people will die no matter how well you prepare. That's not very inspiring. No, but it's honest, and honest is what they need if they're going to survive what's coming." The riders reached the edge of town and dismounted. Young faces, scared but determined. The same expression Elias had seen on everyone in Shadow Creek when they'd decided to stand instead of run. He walked out to meet them, Rachel beside him, ready to share what they'd learned, ready to help another town write its own story of resistance. Behind him, Shadow Creek stood in the morning light, damaged but unbroken, scarred but standing. A testament to the idea that ordinary people could become extraordinary when the alternative was unacceptable. Elias Crow had come here to die quietly, to disappear into obscurity and pretend his past didn't matter. Instead, he'd found something worth living for, something worth fighting for, something worth teaching others to fight for, too. That wasn't the redemption he'd been looking for when he arrived, but standing here in the morning light, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with him, teaching others to do the same, it was close enough. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving. Men like Voss would always exist, preying on the weak and undefended. That wouldn't change. But Shadow Creek had proven something important, that the weak didn't have to stay weak, that the undefended could learn to defend, that victims could become survivors, and survivors could become something more. Elias didn't know how long it would last, didn't know if Shadow Creek would still be standing in 10 years, or if it would burn eventually like Voss predicted. But right now, in this moment, it stood. And that was enough. The riders were waiting. Elias took a breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked forward to meet them, ready to share what Shadow Creek had learned, ready to help them write their own story. Behind him, the town watched, not with fear anymore, but with something harder to name, pride maybe, or just the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd made a choice that mattered. The sun climbed higher, the day grew hot, and Shadow Creek carried on, stubborn and unbreakable, a place where ordinary people had learned that survival wasn't about accepting the world's violence. It was about standing against it, together, however imperfectly, however costly, for as long as it took.